Today's discussion will be presented in 3 sections since we are recording it for a radio broadcast on Federal News Radio 1500 AM. You're welcome to post questions and comments during the session. We'll try to answer them online. I'd like to introduce our moderator, Tom Temin, host of the Federal Drive Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com.
Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guests today are Vincent Sritapan, the Program Manager for the Cybersecurity Division in the Science and Technology Directorate at the Department of Homeland Security. John Johnson is the Enterprise Mobility Team Manager at the GSA. Joshua Franklin, Information Security Test Engineer at the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And Johnny Overcast, Director of Government Sales at Samsung Electronics America. Good to have you all on. And our topic today is mobile security. And I thought a good place to begin would be the state of mobile security as it is now, 8 years into this mobile revolution that has really engulfed the government. And I think we all like it, but we do worry about security. So Joshua, from NIST, why don't we start with you? What does it look like from the NIST standpoint where the standards get developed?
Sure. I mean, in general, agencies are providing devices to their employees. BYOD is not that common at this point in time. Enterprise mobility management and containers on the actual devices. That's a pretty common way of doing mobile in the federal enterprise at this point in time.
All right, and so NIST has published a lot about cybersecurity as it specifically
just a little bit, yeah.
So what are the publications people need to look
Sure.
at? What's the state of them?
Yeah, so SP 800-124 is basically the mobile device management document. SP 163 is vetting the security of mobile applications. SP 157, doing derived PIV creds on the actual phone. There's definitely a number of publications, and then in any small project or discipline, there will definitely be standards and other guidance and best practices. For instance, we have documents on LTE 4G security. We have documents for how to do mobile VPNs. And so there's no shortage of guidance from NIST in this area.
Okay, and Vincent, Homeland Security is involved in a big framework effort for the government also.
Yeah, so as we see it, mobile security for the federal government is actually still maturing. I'd say mobile technology itself is somewhat mature. We've given out devices to users. We have device enrollment and policy enforcement via enterprise mobility management solutions. But today, the security piece is actually lacking. So you'll find that it's quite immature or still maturing, if you could say that, mainly because just accounting for what we have and what's on the device, but then what do we do when an incident occurs? That's still something that isn't fully integrated into security operations centers today. That's an area where you see we have guidance for application vetting or PIV drive credentials, but how much has there been adoption across the board? That's still evolving and still being worked out. You'll find that there's more than one way to do it. So in our point of view, or from a DHS, if I could say, you'll see that it's still an area that is still growing, an area where we need work, where you're going to find implementation, whether it's security configuration hardening guides that need to be done, to actual R&D that we're actually funding and going in that direction, because you'll find today that we are building more and more mobile applications. So you'll find that mission critical mobile apps are being used for the mission, but then when we talk about how do you secure them, how are you delivering them on the enterprise, what's the issue when you have a vulnerability? Can I deal with that? Things like Pegasus or Trident in the news, if you've seen that, where 3 exploits or 0-day exploits are being used to deliver one payload. How do we deal with that? I mean, that's something that, the security offices are tackling today to figure out, well, do I clean up after the fact? Can I just patch it and prevent it? Those are all struggles that we are looking to solve.
So it sounds like there are issues with mobile devices by virtue of the fact that they're mobile devices, that are added to the general cybersecurity issues the government is still trying to grapple with?
Partly. I mean, the device itself you'll find is somewhat locked down, at least from the operating system level, to sometimes the device and manufacturer. But you'll find you have to look at things in the entire total mobile ecosystem. So not only the device, but the applications, the firmware that resides on the device, the baseband, all the way to the network that you reside on, right? Your network infrastructure. So trying to solve, legacy issues like SS7 to other just problems of authentication, PIV drive credential as a government requirement, but not necessarily an industry problem. We have issues throughout that we have to deal with, and not necessarily a bad thing. It's just, it's new, right? It's changing how we deliver IT enterprise services. Mobility is bringing that closer to the edge, right, to the user. So it's just something we have to evolve with.
And John, GSA is always the deliverer of a lot of this and the assembler of contracts to support mobile security and every other kind of security. What do you see from your standpoint?
No, what most people don't realize is that, what Josh does at NIST, what Vince does at DHS, and what we do over at GSA is really all interconnected, right? Josh and NIST are setting out the standards that agencies and that industry need to jump towards. Vince and his group over at DHS are paying attention to what those evolving threats are, and they're actually funding solutions in government so that those threats can be addressed. And our role within my program and the role at GSA is to make sure that as those technologies emerge, they're conforming to what Josh is putting together for standards, and we're working very closely with Vince to make sure that new and emerging technology that kind of deals with this evolution of a mobile threat posture ends up being able to be procured by agencies across government. Vince talked about an evolution, and really to find out where you are today, you need to sort of figure out where you were yesterday. I know that there are many people who wish that the federal government moved more rapidly. Fact of the matter is, within the last 5 or 6 years, the federal government has completely transformed their entire back-end infrastructure to deal with new and emerging devices that agencies could use so that they can work anywhere, anytime, any place. We've reconfigured our back-end infrastructure to manage those devices and applications on the back end. This all started with the digital government strategy. And where we are now is just addressing those, with any evolution, there's going to be an evolution of threats. There's going to be more attack patterns. There's going to be more considerations in order to completely enable a mobile workforce in a secure way. And so the three of us really work well together, and we continue to facilitate and foster that evolution in government.
And at GSA, I think as well as at many agencies, you live the mobile life yourself professionally.
We do, and when it comes to, and our CISO group over at GSA does an exceptional job. One of the hard parts that Josh has over at NIST is putting out standards and guidance for all federal agencies who may have variable security postures. The security posture over at GSA is very different than the security posture of what Vince has to deal with over at DHS. Right, the security posture of an agency has to do with the information that's going back and forth between the devices and the back-end infrastructure. That's a very challenging environment. Federal agencies are creatures of habit, and so it's very difficult for them to move forward on anything unless there's some sort of either a forcing function or some sort of policy, some sort of guidance, some sort of roadmap for them to sort of look at things and execute on their own behalf. Unfortunately over at GSA, we've got a very forward-thinking group who is willing to tinker, willing to try. We're not the only ones that do that, though. Department of Justice and FBI do the same thing. Really, we're at in that evolutionary stage. You got to play, you got to tinker, you got to kick things around. You got to see what works, see what doesn't, and make the best security judgments for your agency based on your particular posture and the information you have to protect.
All right, and Johnny, of course, the mobile devices have come a long way since we first got them, and all they were for email and paging. Those days are long over. In fact, they're barely phones for a lot of people, but every other computer function. And so what does it look like from your standpoint as someone who is selling and marketing these devices and where there's a pretty robust competition?
Well, I'd like to hit upon a theme here, and that is the interconnectedness of all of us here. You have NIST, DHS, well, like John said, other agencies as well. John mentioned the digital strategy from 2012 and GSA, and then there's industry. So, and Samsung primarily, talking from that vantage, because that's where I sit, we've done a lot with mobile security since the publication of the digital strategy. As Vincent mentioned, there's hardening of the device all the way from the hardware layer all the way through the application layer. So we've done a lot. We've conformed to a lot of the NIST requirements, a lot of the requirements that the DoD has put forward. So there is a hardened device that's very usable for the federal government end user, functional user group. With that said, what we realize and what we're doing as well is that we are working with our agency brethren to also see where we fit in or where we can actually help and enhance security posture that is beyond the device itself. So, the transport, other elements, just to help our agencies evolve as industry is evolving, which is no easy task. You have all these requirements, and it's not an easy fit. It's not an easy task, but it's something that industry must do to help our very important customer keep pace.
And of course, a lot of vendors have to work together in concert too. John, you had a comment.
No, I really like what Johnny said, and then again, that's something that ties Josh, Vince, myself together, is that we as a government can't do anything from a security perspective without industry. There are times where we set out policy stretch goals. We did that early on with these mobile security baseline with the digital government strategy. We knew that industry was not going to be able to satisfy 100% of what we were looking for. But at the same time, what we did was we set a target, and industry was able to not only try to reach that target, but then really rapidly exceed that target over time. The federal government is a bureaucracy. We all know that, and there is some challenges associated with having a bureaucracy. There's debate in terms of what it is that we're good at and how effective we end up being providing services and really just leading. Just being on the leading edge of things throughout society. What Vincent's talking about and what you were talking about, we lead on cybersecurity. There are not very many organizations, whether it's healthcare, whether it's finance, that have cybersecurity as such a focus and really put out those policies, put out those solutions, and really have that as a core function. And that helps industry as well as it bleeds over into their, as you firm up what it is that you're doing for the government, it bleeds over to the other sectors and helps make that more robust as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to add on that, there is the hardening. There is security that is renowned out there in the marketplace, but also there's flexibility, especially with millennials entering the workforce, and the government's no different. You've got to have a hardened device. You've got to have the kind of posture that allows for what these new workers coming into the workforce, and government's no different, what they expect to use. So that's essential, and that's what the tie is across the board. Again, how do you achieve that compatible, that required security for critical mission and otherwise? And how does industry again keep that tie with the government? Sometimes it's the government pulling industry with those standards, and then it's sometimes industry with the pace it's evolving its technology that's having our government customers take pause and look at their requirements as well.
And on that theme of industry, Vincent, the DHS recently put out an RFI on mobile security, request for information, back in August. Do you have any results back, and what are they telling you that you can share so far?
So we've analyzed the results, and actually GSA put it out on behalf of DHS. So
just one big kumbaya group here today.
So we actually all know each other from the digital government strategy back in 2012. Right. So we've worked with each other for quite some time. I'll say that we did get responses back, good and bad, in the sense of we gave examples of what are the types of threats across 5 different threat categories. But in particular, we looked at, we were also looking for additional threats that we didn't capture, right? Because we only gave an example. Unfortunately, I think industry responded directly to those examples and not necessarily gave us more. So we did find areas where you can see where in the network infrastructure piece there wasn't as much response. Things around baseband firmware, things around also an application side of the house that you'll find. There's just different pieces that we are still analyzing the data. So I won't say, we have all the results just yet. We're still working on that and incorporating it. It's just one of the many sources that we are using for the congressional study on mobile device security to look at both the threats and defenses. But I will note that there were, 46 organizations that responded to that RFI, about 143 if you took out some of the duplicates, responses to the worksheet, so 5 threat categories, 143 that we're processing. So it's quite a bit, and I think 19 white papers and standards. And so you'll find that there is a lot of good solutions out there. One of the things that we noted was that industry, or I guess government in this case, really didn't know about all of them and how that responds, because you'll find a threat in one area, whether it's in applications or in the network infrastructure or maybe in your enterprise, but then how you respond to it is not a one-for-one, right? You could respond to it from a different part of the ecosystem and say, hey, I'm covering you on this, encryption over the network, or I'm covering you for your vulnerability that may exist in your application. And so we're still diving into that results.
It's safe to say some good ideas, but not a vast harvest of vulnerabilities yet that you didn't know about. But even if you get a few, it's probably a worthwhile.
Yes, definitely.
effort.
I mean, I definitely want to thank industry for responding back. That was definitely useful for us, eye-opening in our side, but also because we're not just looking at, what's the difference between threats and defenses and where that gap is. I mean, I want to know, because that's where research lies, but I also want to know where we do have defenses for, and there is a real need for there is a real need for defenses because there is a real threat. And so some of that, just some pieces that you can do on the network are quite amazing. So, I mean, we're going to put all of that in our report when that goes out, so I don't want to spoiler alert on that one just yet, and I have to get buy-off from leadership too. So
All right,
that's
good,
important.
good reading coming up. On that note, we'll take a short break here. My guests today are you just heard from Vincent Sritapan, the Program Manager in the Cybersecurity Division in the Science and Technology Directorate at Homeland Security. Joshua Franklin is the Information Security Engineer at the National Institute of Standards and Technology. John Johnson, Enterprise Mobility Team Manager at the GSA. And Johnny Overcast, Director of Government Sales at Samsung Electronics America. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. Our panel is The Framework for Mobile Security in Government, sponsored by Samsung Electronics America, here on Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com.